You're not shit and you never were shit.
She thinks she's entitled to this huge MMA.
She walked into the octagon like she owned the world. A woman in a sport built by men, unapologetic, unstoppable, and wrapped in an aura so fierce that opponents were already halfway defeated before the fight even began. For years, she was the face of invincibility, a champion who ended fights in seconds, a media icon who broke every rule Hollywood ever wrote about female strength, a symbol of rage, discipline, and destiny, all forged inside a life that began with tragedy. But behind the highlight reels was a storm. How does someone rise from a childhood marked by loss, disability, and relentless pressure to become the first woman ever signed to the UFC, the fighter who forced an entire corporation and an entire culture to change? And how does a woman who once seemed untouchable fall in front of the entire world in a defeat so shocking it rewrote her legacy in a single night? This is the story of Ronda Rousey, a warrior who conquered the impossible, lost everything in seconds, disappeared when the world expected her to rise, and returned in a form no one expected. From Olympic tatami to UFC glory. From Hollywood spotlights to the darkest moments of her life. This is Stars and Scandals, the rise, ruin, and rebirth of Ronda Rousey. Ronda Jean Rousey was born in Riverside, California, into a family built on resilience and scarred by tragedy. Her entrance into the world was already a battle. A lack of oxygen during birth left her unable to speak properly until she was 6 years old. While other children formed sentences effortlessly, Ronda struggled to pronounce even the simplest words. The frustration, the teasing, the sense of isolation, it all carved a quiet fire inside her. Her mother, Anne Maria DeMars, was not just any parent. She was the first American woman to win a judo world championship, a warrior in her own right. Under her roof, weakness was never an option. Anne Maria trained Ronda using the same intensity she once faced on the world stage. Wake-up throws, relentless drills, and a mantra that would echo through Ronda's life: always be the one who attacks first. But Ronda's childhood carried a deeper wound. When she was 8, her father, Ron Rousey, took his own life after a devastating sledding accident left him paralyzed and in chronic pain. The grief shattered the family and left young Ronda with questions no child should ever face. She grew up haunted by the fear of losing control, the fear of watching everything collapse again. Yet instead of breaking her, the pain hardened her resolve. By the time she stepped onto the judo mat, she wasn't just fighting opponents. She was fighting the world, her past, and the shadows that followed her. Ronda's first steps into competitive judo were anything but graceful. She was smaller, younger, and often overwhelmed by girls who were stronger and more experienced. But she had something no coach could teach: a relentless hunger to win, fueled by every hardship she had endured. By her teens, she was traveling the world, collecting bruises, medals, and lessons in equal measure. She learned to take defeat the same way she took hits: quickly, brutally, and without ever letting her opponents see the pain. Her signature move, the armbar, started to form like a weapon sharpened by destiny itself. At just 17, she qualified for the 2004 Athens Olympics. She didn't bring home a medal, but she brought back something more important: the certainty that she belonged on the biggest stage. 4 years later, in Beijing, she made history. Ronda Rousey became the first American woman to win an Olympic medal in judo, taking home bronze. That moment should have been the beginning of stability, but instead, it was the start of a crisis. She was broke, directionless, and exhausted from years of pressure. Then came a new idea. A dangerous idea. A sport still considered too brutal, too vicious, too unfeminine for women to succeed. Mixed martial arts. Ronda stepped into an amateur MMA gym with no fanfare. No money and no expectation, just a fire that refused to die. Within months, she was finishing opponents in under a minute. Within a year, the world began to whisper her name. And within 2 years, those whispers would become a roar that would change the UFC forever. When Ronda Rousey entered the world of professional MMA, she didn't just compete, she detonated. Fight after fight ended in under a minute. Arms bent backward, opponents tapping in shock, commentators screaming in disbelief. It wasn't just dominance. It was something closer to inevitability. Her armbar became one of the most feared submissions in modern combat sports. But what truly changed everything was a decision made by one man, Dana White. A man who once declared, with absolute certainty, women will never fight in the UFC. Ronda made him swallow those words. In 2012, she became the first woman in history to sign with the UFC. And not just as a fighter, she became the inaugural UFC Women's Bantamweight champion. Her arrival was so explosive that the UFC didn't create a women's division and then find a champion. They found Ronda Rousey and then built a division around her. She defended her title again and again, each victory more violent and mesmerizing than the last. 54 seconds to 16 seconds to 14 seconds to 34 seconds, she wasn't just winning. She was annihilating, and Hollywood took notice. Soon, Ronda was appearing in The Expendables 3, Furious 7, and Entourage. Fashion magazines put her on their covers. ESPN named her the baddest woman on the planet. For a moment, she wasn't just the biggest female fighter in the world. She was one of the biggest stars on the planet. Period. She became a symbol of strength, a symbol of women breaking barriers, a symbol of what happens when someone refuses to stay small. Ronda Rousey had climbed from trauma, poverty, and obscurity to stand at the top of the world with millions watching, but the higher the climb, the harder the fall. And Ronda's fall would be unlike anything the UFC had ever seen. At the height of her power, Ronda Rousey seemed untouchable. She walked into arenas like a living myth, chin high, eyes unblinking, the very embodiment of dominance. Fans didn't wonder if she would win. They wondered how fast. And then came November 14, 2015, UFC 193. Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm. From the opening bell, something was wrong. Ronda looked slower, frustrated, desperate. Holly was calm, precise, surgical. And then, a left high kick heard around the world. Ronda fell. The crowd erupted. And the empire she built for years collapsed in seconds. For the first time, she wasn't the hunter. She was the hunted. Memes flooded the internet. Headlines mocked her. Former fans turned into critics overnight. Even fellow fighters, many of whom she had inspired, joined in on the ridicule. Behind the scenes, the damage was even worse. Ronda later admitted that, in the aftermath of the loss, she contemplated ending her life. The invincible champion had become a public punchline. The woman who once carried the UFC on her shoulders suddenly couldn't bear her own. And then came the next blow. Her 2016 comeback fight against Amanda Nunes lasted just 48 seconds. No dramatic redemption. No triumphant return. Just another brutal reminder that the sport she once dominated had moved on. Media narratives twisted her confidence into arrogance, her intensity into instability, her silence into weakness. Every aspect of her life was scrutinized: her relationships, her attitude, her mental health. Even her transition to Hollywood was mocked as an escape rather than a pivot. The fall wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was public. It was merciless. In a span of 1 year, Ronda Rousey went from being the most feared female athlete alive to a symbol of shocking defeat and the fragility of fame. But her story wasn't over, because legends don't disappear, they transform. After her second devastating loss, Ronda Rousey vanished. No interviews. No apologies. No explanations. The world waited for an answer, but instead she chose silence. And in that silence, she began rebuilding herself, away from the cameras. She rediscovered something she had long buried beneath pressure and expectation: a life beyond being the champion. Slowly, she reconnected with her family, her passions, and her sense of identity, not as a fighter, but as a human being. Then came an unexpected twist. In 2018, Ronda signed with WWE, stepping into a world where performance, storytelling, and athleticism collided. Critics predicted failure. Fans were unsure. But Ronda didn't come back to be the fighter she once was. She came back to become something new. Within months, she transformed into one of WWE's biggest attractions. Her natural intensity fit the stage like it was designed for her. She moved crowds, headlined major events, and revived the same energy that once filled UFC arenas. Not through fear, but through charisma. Outside the ring, she embraced roles she never had time for, advocating for mental health, supporting women in sports, speaking openly about trauma, resilience, and healing. Her comeback wasn't about reclaiming old glory. It was about redefining victory. Ronda Rousey didn't return as the invincible warrior the world once worshipped. She returned as a survivor. A woman who walked through humiliation, heartbreak, and darkness and came out stronger, softer, and more self-aware than ever. Today, Ronda Rousey stands as one of the most influential athletes of her era, not because she was perfect, but because she was impossible to ignore. She didn't just win fights. She changed an entire sport. Before Ronda, women were told they didn't belong in the cage. After Ronda, every major MMA promotion in the world built women's divisions. Girls who once dreamed in silence now train out loud, knowing that the door she kicked open will never be closed again. Her legacy isn't defined by the losses that ended her reign. It's defined by the courage that built it. From Olympic podiums to UFC championship gold, from brutal defeats to personal rebirth, Ronda Rousey proved that greatness is not a straight line. It's a battlefield, and even when the world tried to write her final chapter, she refused to let them hold the pen, because the journey of Ronda Rousey is living proof that strength isn't measured by how hard you hit, but by how many times you rise when everything tries to break you. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stars and scandals where legends rise, fall, and are remembered forever.